Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. We have a guest that is very unique from other guests that we've had on the show before, Harriet Hadfield. I'm going to call her Harry because that's what she's known by. But if you're searching on Google, use Harriet Hadfield. Anyways, Harry is an incredibly talented celebrity makeup artist. You've done Olivia Rodrigo's makeup. You've done so many faces that we all know and love. You're a YouTuber, you're a business coach, you're a fellow podcaster. And what I really admire about you, Harry, is you are fighting against the starving artist trope. You're also neurodivergent, which I have loved featuring other entrepreneurs who are neurodivergent as well, because I think that's your superpower. The way that your brain
Mm.
thinks and works is different. And your case study today is going to be centered around how you're utilizing YouTube to really leverage and sell your own unique offers, but we'll also touch briefly on some of the other ways that you're monetizing YouTube. Before we get into that, Harry, welcome to the show. And I would also love to hear your Cubicle to CEO story, how you made that leap into entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellen. I'm so excited to be here. Yes, to all of what you just said. I feel like my story starts with, I guess, being like the black sheep of the family. I think a lot of people will recognize we all have a narrative we hear growing up of like, you've got to be a doctor or a lawyer or like go to university. Like, there's a lot of boxes to check.
Mhm.
And I always knew, like, I've always been the creative kid that was like collecting the cereal boxes to make something random, like,
That's awesome.
anything that got like was going to get thrown away. I was like, Mom, no, like I need that. I'm going to make Tracy Island. I'm going to make a jewelry box, like whatever it was. I was always creating. And I think the hardest thing for me, like growing up, was I was also aware that being a creative was seen as cute, like it wasn't seen
Mm,
as a business.
yeah.
So when I think back to being at school, especially, school didn't really set me up to be a creative entrepreneur because it was like, what's your plan B? What's going to be your real job? Like this real job rhetoric, I think is so painful for creatives because getting taken seriously, it's not just society at large. It starts at home with our families. It starts
Yes.
with our friends who are also getting 9 to 5 jobs. So I definitely grew up identifying as a creative who it wasn't till I got to about age 14, I would say. I remember my mum got this book for Christmas. It was by a really famous makeup artist. Keep in mind, this is pre-YouTube. This is pre-Instagram. We still use books.
Wait, is it Bobby Brown by chance?
No, it was Kevin O'Quan, but
Oh, okay.
her books were big at the time too, and I think
Yeah.
I also had her books. And I remember my mum had this book, and I was like, "Wait, this can be a job?" Like, I think it was the first time I'd actually seen someone talk about traveling the world, and this person in particular was a celebrity makeup artist. So I was like, "Oh, that's a thing you can get paid to do." And back then, there really wasn't. Again, I think about makeup courses now, the ways there are to learn how to be a creative and really hone your craft. Those things didn't really exist. It was like you can go to art school. Like there wasn't really anything as hyper specific as what we see today. But I did manage to find I mean, I remember school having like the school plays and, productions and being like, can I do makeup? And really trying to just do anything I could to learn. I did find a makeup course like at a local college in the UK is not college like what it is in the US. Like our university is your college. So college in the UK is more like a post education almost. Like
Okay.
you don't have to go, but it's something you can do like in between
Mm,
school and university. And I found this course and it was kind of like a little bit of everything. It was like it's beauty therapy, it's makeup, it's special effects. And I was like, this is amazing. Okay, I can't wait to learn. And doing that, I was like the geek who just was like going all in. I was like, I don't care how late you need me to stay, I'll do all the things. From there, I moved to London. And I think that was where my education really began because it was like,
mm.
okay, there's no roadmap to be a successful creative. And I was very aware then that the rhetoric was still, oh, you just have to get an agent. You just have to assist if that, as if it was that easy because we didn't have YouTube yet. I was like the MySpace generation. So I feel like MySpace was the first time I realized, oh, things are going to change. Like how we get work as creatives, we're being given these platforms that we get to really utilize in a way that feels authentic to us. It gives us the power back. And I think that was the first time I'd even become aware of something like YouTube, and was like, for me to get people to know my work, I don't have to send my 11 by 14 books that cost me a fortune to production companies. Like that was what I grew up being told would happen. And I think as well, like in terms of my story, the thing I've been most aware of, Ellen, is the fact that there's so much secrecy in creative industries.
Mm,
It's
yes.
very much like the dog eat dog, the starving narrative, artist narrative exists because the fear is the pool of success is small. So if I help you, you take away from me being successful. And that's really where Freelance for Freedom and the business I have in terms of being a coach came from.
I love the abundant philosophy that you have when it comes to the creative community, the artist community. I think that is such a game-changing narrative for people to really hear and not only hear, but see lived out in the
Mm,
way that you practice your business. And I think this is something that we really try to cultivate in our community too, that life and business are not a zero-sum game, that the pie
mm,
is ever expanding. And the thing I always like to say, maybe you can even relate to this, Harry, is that, even if you wanted to, let's say, do everyone's face of makeup in the entire world, like you just physically don't have the hours in the day to
mm,
actually serve every possible person. So to try to act as if someone taking a client means that you'll have less is almost silly when you think about how many billions of faces there are to do makeup on, right? So I really love hearing your story and, what you said, especially about how artists and creatives traditionally have been excluded from the
mm,
conversation or even the possibility of business is it kind of reminds me of this past year I spoke at an event hosted by KSWELI, which stands for Kendra Scott Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Institute.
amazing.
It's kind of a mouthful, but anyways, they are, an entrepreneurship center based at UT Austin here in the
Mm,
States. And Kendra Scott is obviously, legendary female entrepreneur, billion-dollar jewelry brand, guest shark, all the things. But what I loved about something she said in her speech at that event that I think connects directly with what you said is she was very intentional about placing her entrepreneurship center not in the business school where people would assume that something like that would go. She instead chose
mm,
to place it, I think, and I might be misquoting here, but I think it's actually in the art school, which is like the
mm.
last place that people would think you would put an entrepreneurship center. And so I just think women like you, women like her are really helping to change the narrative around what an entrepreneur can look
Mm.
like and who they can become. So, anyways, thank you for that wonderful
Oh,
introduction.
thank
Your
you.
case study today is you have made $330,000 from selling your own business offers. So, like you mentioned, you have a program, Freelance with Freedom. You also
Yeah.
have a mastermind for higher level entrepreneurs. You've sold $330,000 directly from YouTube. I want to first kind of just set the scene for our listeners. So,
Mm,
Freelance with Freedom and then Industry Icon Mastermind. What is the offer price of each of those two programs?
yeah.
And what are the sales vehicles for those two programs? As in, do you direct people to a webinar? Are you directing people directly to a sales page? Are they hopping on a sales call? How do you actually sell each program?
So Freelance with Freedom is my lifetime program. So that one is 3,500. It started off as a 6-month program. Everyone just kept wanting to resign. And I was like, I actually want a program that is lifetime where creatives can be nurtured and feel they have a support system to consistently be a part of. So that was my first program. And I had to learn how to get really good at selling that before I even thought about introducing a mastermind. So if I start with Freelance with Freedom first, it was built off of my community. Again, listening to people. And I think the more I talked about both on my YouTube channel and on my Instagram, I really was very vocal about the things that, don't know if I'm allowed to swear, the things that really annoyed me about my industry. Like it was being very vocal about like, hey, are we okay with this? Like I think so much as an industry, and I think, the strikes are a great example of this, but for most freelancers, there aren't typical governing bodies where we can go and collectively say, hey, this isn't okay. Hey, there's
Mm,
gates being put in front of us when it's so nonsensical. Like you said, yes, there's more artists than ever before, but there's also more clients than ever before. Like that, you can't argue with. And I think for me, what I did with YouTube, especially, was it started with I think really like when you have an offer, people buy your mission, they buy your movement. Like I think so many people were connected to what I was talking about. And so many people felt like, this is me. Oh my gosh, I know what it's like to feel blindsided, to assist for 10 years and then not have any idea how I'm going to make my own money. I'm still playing by the old school rules. Like I call it like the old
Right.
school narrative. And they're wondering why they're still not making money.
Mm.
And I was just like, again, are we okay with this? I was like, this is so nonsensical. And I think because, especially as someone who had come from a small town, moved to London, built celebrity clientele, and then I had to start again from scratch and do it all again in LA. And it kind of didn't matter who I knew in London. I literally was starting again. And because I'd been able to move markets twice, and I've had agents, but I've also learned how to make more money without one. So I had the skill set to teach other people exactly what I'd done. And people wanted it. People were like, I think it starts with your mission, it starts with your movement. People feel seen, people feel connected to something. So it started really with telling people about it. And it did start with a wait list, but now we do use webinar strategy for
Got it.
Freelance with Freedom because I think I'm at a point now where more cold people are coming in, more people find me through someone else and helping them. The way I see the beauty of a webinar is you can give someone the story in a condensed space. You
Yes.
can kind of give them like the bullet points
Yes.
in a way that with a wait list, I think more people signing up to a wait list for the most part know about you or have a level of interest in you already.
Yes, 1,000%. I can totally agree. I think we sold our evergreen offer for years through a webinar
Mhm.
funnel, and actually, you're so right. I don't think people always talk about it that way, but it's a storytelling format. And I think, so many
Mm,
people when they think webinar, they think sales pitch, they think, logistics, that they're not really focused on the story. But I really admire how story is so central to everything that you
yeah.
do. So I think that's a great reminder. And story kind of like leads us, I guess, into this big picture of what your YouTube content strategy looks like. The thing I'm really curious to know from you, Harry, is there are so many ways to approach YouTube. Some people approach YouTube as full-time content creators
Yeah.
where, the content is the product itself. They're not necessarily leading anywhere. I think where you really shine is you are utilizing the content to drive sales to your own
Mhm.
offer. So, can you just walk us through real quick, as a viewer, what kind of content are we seeing on a weekly basis from you?
So right now, I think, and this kind of leads more into my mastermind as well. My mastermind is really about being an industry icon, which is how I position myself on YouTube. So I think
Mhm.
a lot of people, once they've learned how to get bookings, they're coming to me to be like, okay, well, how do I get people to book me outside of just being an artist, to want me in a capacity of whether it's them educating other people, whether it's them doing speaking engagements, whether it's them getting contracts with brands where they become an educator for a brand or like a higher level endorsement. For
Right.
me, my YouTube strategy was very much had a lot to do with identity. I feel like the way I use my YouTube channel was like, I'm going to show up as if I already am the celebrity makeup artist before I was one. So
Mm.
for me, a lot of my strategy was like, how would I show up if I already had those clients? How would I teach? And I think the biggest thing that helped me with YouTube is a lot of people spin out around, I don't want to make out I'm the know it all. And I'm like, you're just teaching your way. Like for me, I don't ever see my way of doing makeup as the right way. I just see it as my way. So again, in terms of there's almost like two audiences I have really. There's the people who love makeup and style and who want to be a part of that world. And there's both as well. Some people are that and they're people who are also a creative themselves. And then I have people who are also like, I just want to be able to build a real business. And I think for me, I definitely consider myself a multi-passionate person. So it's almost knowing like dance. It's like understanding the dance of like, who am I speaking to when I'm giving out particular kinds of content?
Mhm.
So YouTube for me helped me understand what are people asking me in my comment section? Like what content is resonating with people? And I think it was also a case of this is where Instagram did come into the mix because there did come a point where I actually then did create Freelance for Freedom as its own Instagram because I recognized there was an audience there that was connecting so much with a story. It was almost like, here's our common room, here's our place to hang out outside of YouTube. But I think the conversations started in YouTube. When I first started out, I remember when I would show videos of my kit, I knew the people watching that primarily were makeup artists. So
Mhm.
again, the questions they were going to have was very different to someone who's like, what's in your makeup bag? I think as well, when you're making content, who are you making it for? Even if you do have a split audience, or your audience avatars, if you like, are starting to shift and evolve.
I want to circle back in just a second to kind of like the more day-to-day view of like the
Mm,
types of videos posted. But before I forget this question, because you brought it up, if someone is serving a split audience like you, people who are just wanting to learn makeup for fun and who
mm,
enjoy doing makeup on themselves versus people who want to do it for a career and as a business, I guess how do you split your attention in terms
mm.
of what percentage of content is catered toward that more amateur audience versus the more professional audience, especially knowing, I suppose, that the professional audience is the one actually buying your offers? So what
Yeah.
percentage split would you say you allocate to those two audiences?
I think I went with what had been successful to start with, which was me as like, I guess you would call it the makeup artist and the content creator, which did quite easily speak to both audiences. I would just say the
Right.
questions were different. Spoiler alert, we are actually starting a secondary YouTube channel next
Oh,
year. So this is like an
okay.
exclusive for Freelancer Freedom, because we've now got to the point where I feel like I know both audiences. My
Right.
advice at the beginning would always be just spend some time getting to know your audience in order to work out what that split is, because I think it's different for everyone. I knew the content I would make around my top favorite foundations would still speak to makeup artists as much as it would the beauty lovers. So there was some content where I knew I could make that had the crossover. And
Mhm.
again, when I first started YouTube, I was also using it strategically to get brands to want to work with me in the lens of sponsorship and stuff like that, because that also brought me a lot of income. And it gave me more power being booked as a celebrity makeup artist because they knew I brought with me an audience. So again, let's say someone's doing the Oscars, you get paid X rate for doing the Oscars, your rate could treble what it starts as when you're then being sponsored by a brand to do said person at the Oscars as well, whether it's
Right.
the skincare, the makeup, whatever. So for me, my split at the beginning, I would say it was very creative and experimental at the beginning. And I think of it as like testing your audience. Like I would test to see like, okay, who's really loud when I make content for makeup artists. So I think, like I said, my community started to grow from a place of people sending me like private DMs or sending me messages where it was like, I have 5 other questions off the back of this video. And the more I was seeing the questions come in around the business side of things, that was when I started to get the idea of, okay, there's a whole other community that's waiting to be served here. And that was when I did start to kind of split the content. So it would be like, this is if you're a makeup artist, this is if you're a beauty lover.
Got it. Okay, so it was really more of like a social listening exercise rather than a cut and dry
Yes.
plan, I suppose, from the beginning. So then if we look again back to your weekly schedule, how many videos do you
Mm.
typically publish a week? Can you just walk us through like the different types of video content you post
Yeah.
and on what days?
So for me, given how busy my schedule is now, one a week is the most I can commit to.
That's a
I
lot.
would,
It's a
yeah,
lot.
that is a lot. And I think that still feels like being in full-time creator mode. So
Yeah.
thankfully I have a team that can now help me with that. But for the longest time, I was doing YouTube by myself. So if I was thinking about my makeup audience who are beauty lovers, for example, it could be my top 10 foundations in my red carpet kit, which even that would still speak to both the makeup lovers who just want to know and are curious and the makeup artists. And this is kind of what I mean about like at the very beginning when I was testing to speak to my viewers who I knew were going to become clients of like my courses, my programs.
Mhm.
It would be again using my story. So I remember doing a video where it was like how I got fired for my first makeup job. And then I kind of was able to talk about how that hadn't stopped me becoming a celebrity makeup artist. And using my story, I do think when I think about YouTube, in order to stop it becoming like a channel where it felt completely separate, like I do this over here and I do this over here, I think I've always made content where it could still speak to both audiences, but both people know what they're taking away from it and kind of like
Mm.
what the questions are that are kind of come next. And when I first, not when I first started my YouTube channel, but when I started to split my content, one thing I did do that was really helpful. I remember I had again, before I even knew about webinars, I had a mailing list where you could actually select are you a makeup lover or an artist? And I actually used to create two separate newsletters. So from YouTube, I could bring everyone in. And then it was actually in the back end of kind of my newsletter before I had separate Instagrams. I was starting to, I guess you would say, like split test. Like, okay, if I send this content over here to the people that I know are artists and potentially my ideal clients for my coaching business and the makeup lovers, it was a great way for me to continue to test what is resonating. And that was probably the first thing I did before I even started a separate Instagram account, was making sure whoever was coming to YouTube, I was collecting email addresses. Like, it didn't matter what you were, if you were a makeup lover or an artist, I was collecting email addresses, but tagging them from the beginning as to kind of which category I was putting them in.
That's smart, like, go wider with the funnel
Yeah,
at the top, right? Just get eyeballs on your content and then kind of
yeah,
filter and target with specific messaging or offers on the back end.
exactly.
Totally makes sense. I'm curious, what are the type of videos that you are seeing drive the most new
Mm,
leads? So people who are opting into your list, people who are opting into the
mm,
webinar, can you give the specific category of videos that you
mm.
see are the most effective for that particular purpose?
I call it like the beginner friendly content. So again, I think when you have been in the industry for many, many years, you forget where the baby version of you started. So I know that my clients are like, what are the do's and don'ts of booking celebrities? Like, it's almost like the BTS slash the things that I think when you've been in the industry for a long time, you just presume people know. But
Mhm.
coming back to the most basic things, again, when you work with a celebrity, being on time, of course, you want to be on time, but you don't want to be half an hour early because you're probably going to be at their home or their hotel
Right.
room. No one wants like a stranger sitting in their hotel room with them for
That's
half an
fair.
hour. But if you're maybe doing a production shoot, it's going to help to get there early because you might have difficulty parking or there'll be
Mm.
people around doing stuff. So I think really talking about the nuance of where it was different and really identifying, if I could wave a magic wand for my audience who wanted to be makeup artists, what would they want to learn from me? And that was where I leaned into, I can teach people how to book a celebrity, no matter where you live, no matter what city you're in, no matter how many Instagram follows you have. My programs have proven, like with Freelancer Freedom especially, we'll
Mm.
show you how to double your bookings in any market, but we'll show you how to book the clients you want, because the internet has made that very possible now. Again, you don't have to live in London or LA or Paris anymore to book those kinds of clients. So I think when it comes to the content, again, my question would always be is like, what are your people searching for? And again, like, have you covered the basics, the beginning foundational questions that they would be searching for in order for them to learn what step 5 is?
Yes. Okay. I can see, especially the nuance piece. Like that was really interesting, just even to hear, like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. You're right. For a production shoot, it would make a
Yeah.
lot of sense to be as early as possible. But yeah, nobody wants you just like awkwardly standing in their kitchen
Yeah.
while they're waiting, waiting to have their face be
Yeah.
done by you. So that makes a lot of sense. I would be interested to know. So those types of videos, those beginner, like top of mind questions or like kind of more just I guess like scenario based
Mm,
videos, those are driving the most leads for your business. But are
mm,
those also typically
mm,
the most viewed videos? Or do you find that there's a difference between the videos that get the most traction in terms of
mm.
views versus the ones that get the most traction for actual leads on the back end?
That's a great question. Again, I know whenever I do things about kit, those videos perform really, really well because I think obviously being a makeup artist, for example, is very visual. So you are how you present yourself, how your kit looks. It needs to be neat, it needs to be tidy. And also it's a lot of stuff to carry. So you're also thinking, how can you condense things?
Yes.
And I think that's also a trend within the niche of my industry right now. So depotting videos, like perfecting your kit, people are searching for that, even if they haven't got questions about business yet. And then it starts making them go, I wonder how she booked that. I wonder how she
Mm,
works with those people. So it's kind of like picking the intrigue to start with of people,
yeah.
like what are they looking for already? And I definitely would say they're like my highest performing videos when it's a bit like the practical things. And that's what I mean when I say usually that's when I get questions from those videos. So it will
Mm,
be like, I've heard you say you work with celebrities. Like, I'm just curious, what would I need to do if I wanted to go do front row celebrities at Paris Fashion Week? What would I want to need to do if I wanted to book a celebrity for a music video? Like, the questions then come, which then shows me how to make other content. And the best advice I would say to everyone with YouTube is, even if you're not getting a lot of views, it doesn't stop you getting a lot of leads, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So just because you have a video that maybe, if I give you the example of my kit ones perform really well, but it could be talking about how I booked my first celebrity, that actually might be more niche and more nuanced, but that could be the video that actually sells more people into my program.
Yes, and I would have to agree with you just across the board. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm newer to YouTube. I've technically been on YouTube since in some capacity since like 2008, but like back in my years like in middle school and high school, I had a music channel just for fun. Like I would do covers
So
and like
cool.
nothing to do with my business. So we didn't really start using YouTube for business like what I currently do as a professional now until really seriously about a year ago. So we're very baby when it comes like in the baby stages when it comes to the growth and I guess using YouTube as a lead gen for a business. But I do think it's so smart how, and I just want to pull this kind of takeaway out for our listeners of how, let's take again your kit videos, right? Where you're showing
Yeah.
people like, this is what's in my kit. I like that you seed like a situation into that video. Like, oh, like this is the kit I took to the red carpet for the Grammys. Like I'm making that up. But like
Yeah.
that's not the focus of the video. But like you said, it gets people to like kind of their ears to perk up and go, wait, what? Like I'm
Yeah.
interested over here about how you even got into that, you know, that situation in the first place. So I think that's really helpful. And also hearing too that your highest viewed videos don't always correlate to
Yeah.
the most amount of leads. And I find that to be true even on like Instagram, for example.
Yeah.
That's where I was going with
Definitely.
this whole thing is that, you know, sometimes the posts on Instagram that to the outside viewer would be like, oh, that post completely flopped. Like it got like less than 100 likes, it barely got any views, and there's like 2 comments. On the back end, those are the posts that are sparking so many conversations in the DMs that get me sales that on the
Mm.
front end you would never see. So, anyways, super encouraging, I think, for people who are posting, maybe not seeing that view traction on
Yeah.
YouTube, but knowing listen for the questions on
Yeah.
the back end. I'm kind of also wanting to know in the early days when you did have a much smaller YouTube audience and maybe you weren't receiving as many inbound DMs from people asking questions, is there anything that you would do to try to pull out more questions from people? Like
Mm.
if someone commented, is there any specific strategy that you would have to try to make that conversation extend beyond like a,
Mm.
oh, love this, or it was helpful?
Yeah.
Anything come to mind for you there?
I'm going back to like past Harry. I'm like, there were definitely a mix of things we did. I mean, I remember we had a little giveaway thing we did called, obviously, my Instagram, my YouTube channel is called Harry Makes Me Up. We had Harry Made Me Up. And we
Oh,
did like competition winners could be made up by me.
okay.
And I think back to that, like it was for me, the online world, there's so little IRL. Okay. And I think that's the hardest thing. Like you can't touch the person, you can't hug the person. Like
Right.
the intimacy is created, I think, more through the storytelling versus like actually being with someone in real life.
Great point. Yes.
But I do think like whenever I did a giveaway, it was like, okay, what would really help my audience? So that was a good example of how people were excited at the possibility of like, oh, we entered, we should hang out. Like I think even like one thing that I loved about my YouTube audience very early on is
Mhm.
that there were people who met in my comment section that actually did their own meetups. And I always thought that was like the coolest example
Wow.
of community where I was like, I don't even have to like fully be in the conversation for you all to be so engaged. So that was one thing. So the other thing I did as well in the early part of my YouTube career, which I think was a big part of not only people speaking to me, but the growth was collaborations. So I was really heavy on who else has an audience similar to mine, who else's content feels really in line with my own. And I didn't just go down the other makeup artist route. You know, there were content creators I saw who I was like, I love the way they do this series, or I love the way they've created this like regular thing that they do week to week. Or I just like them. Again, I'm very drawn to people. Like I feel like that's very much in my personality. And collaboration was huge for my channel, not just in the sense of naturally from a lead generation point of view, more people find you, more people know about you. But I think it was like, okay, if no one's talking, am I asking enough questions? Like, do I need to repeat the question? So I also think as well, like any kind of platform you're on, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, email marketing, there is a lot of repetition required. And are you willing to show up when, for want of a better word, no one's watching? Are you
Mm.
willing to go live when no one's there? Like, are you willing to keep showing up and asking the questions? And I also think get creative with that. Like, it's almost like, how can I ask the same question in 100 different ways? Like, what is the information I need? Because also when your community is talking to you, that's also how you figure out what your objections are. Like, that's the other thing that's really important with your community, is you get to understand, okay, what are the things they believe about themselves that make it impossible for them to do this? What are the things that are circumstantial that they believe makes this impossible for them? And I think getting people talking, like, are you leading by example? Like, if you're never showing up and never, instigating conversation, why would your community do so with you?
That's so true. I would love to know in this last year, in, the 330,000 that you've generated from your own programs, what is the most successful collaboration that
Mm,
you've done in this last year? I love that you brought that up. And so YouTube is such a unique format.
mm,
On Instagram, you might do a collab reel with someone and it's really easy. You just tag them. On
yeah.
YouTube, and again, I'm not as familiar with using YouTube for business as you are, but if I am, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but you can like link someone else's video as like an end card, like on
Mm.
your video, right? That will direct them there. Or I guess you could do like a joint video series where maybe part one's on your channel, part two's on someone else's channel. But what was your most successful collaboration that worked really well
Mm.
for you this year in driving new leads to your offer?
Great question. I think collaboration is something we're coming back to because it was something that worked so well in the early days. So it's actually something we're bringing back more. I wouldn't say I think I've done it more on Instagram because I was growing a new Instagram account this year. But when I
Right.
think about collaborations that were really successful for me, and again, I think you can make it as simple as you want it to be. So if you can be there in person, there were definitely ones I did in person. So sometimes it was someone who I really wanted to talk to about their business or their experience in the industry, and I would do their makeup. So sometimes it was
Oh.
having them where, again, the makeup lovers will please because I was doing makeup, but the people who also wanted that like BTS, like the real nitty gritty of like what it takes to be in the industry, they were also like with their pen and paper writing down notes as
Mhm.
well. So definitely like when I could do something with someone, and definitely in my beginnings of my YouTube channel, anytime someone was in my city or I was going somewhere where I knew another YouTube was safely, I might add, I definitely was thinking about how could I, whether it was offer up like, hey, are you going out for dinner that night? And do you want to come be on my channel and I'll do your makeup? We can chat. And I think when you've built a community, you will attract people with bigger audiences anyway, because there were people earlier on that were like, oh, I would love to have your perspective on whatever topic it was. And for me, it often did look like either we did a video from my channel and their channel, or we were doing something where maybe it was equally combined with Instagram as well. So, sometimes we get really creative and be like, we're going to do this here and that over there. But there were people I definitely did collaborations with that weren't in person as well, where we would literally just say whether we've picked a theme, we're going to talk about a topic. I know there was a makeup artist in Australia that we did, no, sorry, Canada. There's a makeup artist in Canada, and she had a huge following of makeup artists. And I remember she was like, can I review your program? Like, can I review it? And I was like,
Oh,
oh my gosh, I would love that. I would love them to see a perspective from another professional makeup artist. And that brought in a ton of leads because not only did people trust her and know her as an expert, but it was also like they got to have the kind of seal of approval from someone.
yes.
And I think some people would be very nervous about that, but I
Yeah.
really trusted my program. And I was like, I also would appreciate your feedback. That was the thing as well. I knew it would help me make my programs better, hearing anything that they did think I could improve.
I love that. I think that again, it's a testament to if you feel comfortable having a peer that you respect review your
Yeah.
program so publicly that you must really believe in
Yeah.
the quality of the program and the results that you can offer your students. So that's actually really interesting. It's kind of got my gears turning. I don't know if any
Mm,
of our listeners are thinking along the same
mm,
lines, but that's an interesting collaboration. I haven't seen really done much, at least in the
mm,
online business space. So thank you for that.
yeah.
Great tip. This is your encouragement. Maybe find a peer in your industry that is
Yeah.
willing to give an honest review of your program and maybe do a collaboration where you review theirs and they review yours. And whether
Exactly.
you post on YouTube or Instagram or across all of your different channels, that is super juicy. So love that. I think that's my highlight golden nugget so far from this episode. This is great.
Yeah.
I would also just kind of like to touch on this trend, I think, that sometimes can keep people away from using YouTube as,
Mm.
a traffic or lead gen source for their business. And it's this idea. I mean, we've all heard that saying, like, oh, I learned it on YouTube University. It's like a cheeky joke, right? Like, you can learn
Yeah.
anything on YouTube. Because of that, and because it's the world's second largest search engine, I think oftentimes, again, this is not speaking to every YouTube viewer, but a lot of times it does attract a lot of DIYers, a lot of people who are
Mm.
freebie seekers. They just want to, learn something in a free tutorial, and they're not really in that mindset of buying, right? So I'm
Mm.
just curious how you have navigated that
Mm.
and made sure that you're creating content that does get people or does incentivize people to go to your offers, to opt into your list, rather than solely attracting freebie seekers who just watch the
Mm.
content and then peace out.
This is such a good question. Two things. I think, first of all, just because someone starts as a freebie seeker doesn't mean they're going to stay a freebie seeker. So,
Great point.
my belief is like, just because someone, for want of a better word, shopping around or like just trying to get the need to know information,
Mhm.
again, what do I have ready for them to be like, oh, and you like this, you should watch this.
Mhm.
So, again, the end board on YouTube is a great way to be like, if you like this topic, make sure you check out this. Okay. So, the other thing I would say is, the best demonstration I can give you is like, if I break down by the side of the road, yes, I might watch a video on YouTube of how to like change a tire. Am I gonna subscribe to that channel? Probably not. So I
Mm-mm.
also think this is where your story is so important. I do think there has to be a level of vulnerability if you want your audience to care, if you want your audience to come back. Because if I think about the example of, a smoky eyeshadow tutorial,
Mm.
there are plenty. There's a plethora of them
Plethora. Yeah.
online. So why would someone come to you? And again, this is why I think we see people online who maybe they're not quote unquote the best makeup artist or the best photographer, but what they have done is they've let their audience in. What they have done is their audience know why they make this content, why it's important to them. And I think sometimes that goes further than being good. Like, I think the belief you just have to be good, I don't believe that anymore. I think there's
Mm.
lots of great people whose content doesn't get seen because, for want of a better word, there's like a boundary, there's a barrier between them and their audience. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you have to tell your life story, but I do think, like, do your audience, are they invested in you teaching the content, or could anybody else be teaching it?
Mhm.
And when it comes to, like I said, they want to know why this is important to you. Like, when I think about freelance for freedom, so many people are connected to destroying the starving artist narrative. They are so tired of it that it's like that's what brings them in and makes my program different from someone else who maybe is a generic marketing person where they could go and learn an Instagram course, but they're like, that person has never been in my shoes. That person doesn't know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck and not even know if I'm going to have a booking in the next 5 months. Like, my story is their story or has been their story. So I do think, like the example I gave you of like changing the tire, like,
Mhm.
maybe if it was like, I don't know, that it was a female founder teaching me how to change a tire, and I was like, oh my God, I love how she got into like automotives. Like maybe if it was like automobiles, sorry, like if there was a story, maybe I would subscribe. But
Yeah.
again, I think it's like how we consume information is different. Sometimes we just want to fill a knowledge gap,
Mhm.
but why would you subscribe if you know nothing about the person and about their world and why it's important to them?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head is that ultimately, like you said, there are many ways that you can find the answer to a question, but who you choose to go to for said answer is
Mm.
all about perspective
Yeah.
and the unique filter or lens in which you share knowledge, right? And so it's funny that you talk about how the core, like, I guess, worldview that you hold, that the starving artist narrative is not true, attracts so many people.
Mm.
I feel like having that strong stance and sometimes polarizing stance, not to
Yeah.
say that people should be polarizing for the sake of being polarizing. But if you do have a really strong opinion or strong viewpoint on something, I think being really upfront with it does really attract your best fit clients, and I guess repel the ones who don't necessarily agree with that standpoint. And I see that true even in one of our past podcast guests this year is also a, huge presence on YouTube, Cody Sanchez.
Mm.
And her whole thing, she is really a strong stance that, like, buying a boring, quote unquote, small business is more effective than doing a startup. Not everyone agrees with that. Or
Yeah.
her idea that, like, having ownership over something is what leads you to have freedom over your life versus being a consumer or a renter. Again, a very strong opinion that some
Mm.
people may feel put off by, but for her, it works because that's the movement, like you mentioned earlier, that she's creating. So, anyways, that's just kind of what it sparked for me. And if you're listening
Mm.
to this today and you haven't heard our episode with Cody, I'll make sure to drop that in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. I think it's a great companion to what Harry is sharing
Mm.
here about having really strong viewpoints in your content. Outside of listening to your audience for questions they really want to know and telling your stories and, building a movement around dismantling the starving artist narrative, do you do any keyword research when it comes to, does that play at all into your
Mm.
content strategy and in thinking about what is like most searched on a month to month or, annual
Yes.
basis?
And again, I would say as we're moving into like setting up the new YouTube channel, which would be our secondary one for Freelance for Freedom now,
Yes.
I'm always looking for if, again, like you said, YouTube is a search engine. I think, yes, of
Right.
course, there are so many sites where you can look for specific keywords and get very hyper specific with it. But for
Mhm.
me, when it comes to generating ideas, again, I have the privilege now of having a program where I know pain points my clients have. I know things that they're struggling with. But I also think like I'll go back to my comments both in Instagram and YouTube and look at what questions I was asked.
Mhm.
And I still think, again, something that is super helpful if you want to sell education is go back to the baby version of you and think about the things you were searching for. So sometimes I will literally go onto YouTube and be like, how do I become a makeup artist? And I'll look at like all the video suggestions that come up and notice which ones are people clicking on, like which ones
Mhm.
do I think like, oh, I have a unique take of how I could do that video. And actually, I think this person missed out XYZ that I could go way more into detail in from the lens of what I know my people want to learn from me. So I think the way I like to use both, I do this with Pinterest as well. Sometimes I will just go on and I like pretend to be starting from scratch again. Or I'll
Mm.
think about like pain points that I know my clients have actually said, like, okay, I know I need to do this, but I don't know how to do it if I live here, or I really want to do this, but I haven't got a website yet. So again, I think trying to think about what is it they're looking for, but there's like the side problem of, but the what if, like, I want this, but what if? Like, I think that gives something much more context as well, because how to become a makeup artist, yes, that's helpful. But again, what if I do live in the middle of nowhere? What if I
Right.
haven't got a website yet? I think like those videos for me feel much more specific help and support than some generic information.
Wait, that's so smart. Okay, this is my second favorite golden nugget you shared today. And it kind of ties back to your earlier point that I'm just gonna bring back to the surface. You said answer the same question 1,000 different ways,
Exactly.
right? And so
Mhm.
that makes a whole lot of sense, and I can even see it being helpful, like you said, for a location base, like answering that question, how do I become a makeup artist in San Francisco? How do I become a makeup artist
Exactly,
in
exactly.
the Midwest? Right? Like it's
Yeah,
the same question, but like you said, a slightly nuanced answer. And so
exactly.
that is so, so smart. I love that. I hope that anyone creating video content in general runs with this gold nugget, even if you're not necessarily publishing on YouTube yet. This is kind of just a hot take. Do you feel that if you stopped posting forever today, obviously that's not going to happen. You just announced you're going to launch a new YouTube channel. But if you were like, I'm done creating YouTube
Mm,
content, do you think the existing bank of videos that you have
mm.
created in the years thus far would be enough to sustain new traffic from search results and new leads coming into your program for considerable amount of time, even
Mm.
if you stopped creating new content?
Yes, I think as long as you have systems in place so that you are, again, whether it's like people can join a wait list or there's somewhere you want them to go in the meantime. I mean, I'll be honest, like I need to check how many years it is exactly, but I think it must be around 10. And
Wow.
with that amount of time on YouTube, there have been gaps. There 100% have been times when I've been like, I need a month off, or maybe I take a hiatus for like 6 months. But I'm always amazed by the amount of work I did up front has
Mm.
afforded me the luxury to come back. And when I do, my audience is so excited that I'm back. They're like, oh my gosh, we've missed you. I've been like refreshing my subscription thing to
Oh.
see if you're there. And I think, again, if you go, I went all in at the beginning. When I first started my YouTube channel, I think there's so much talk in the marketing world of consistency. And I do
Mhm.
agree with that. But I think as long as you front load at the beginning, you give yourself the space that when you do need time off, and again, now the way I run my business, I have repurposing content strategies. There's lots of things I can do behind the scenes to give me more time off without my audience knowing I'm having time off. But
Right.
at the beginning, I definitely think like when there's been times where I've taken breaks, I've still seen people find me. And again, sometimes you do go like, oh, just out of curious, where did you find this? And they'll be like, oh, I saw a YouTube channel where you linked, da, da, da. I'd seen a video. And you're like, huh, that's amazing that that still works for me. Again, when I think about Instagram, I love Instagram and I think creators benefit hugely from it. But I do think Instagram, again, to search for something so specific, it's not a
Difficult.
search engine versus YouTube. Like, still, it blows my mind. So my videos now that have had hundreds of thousands of views where I'm like, I forgot I did that. And you see questions come in where you're like, oh, that was 10 years ago. And there's still something that's completely relevant today, even if other things within the video are no longer for sale, or maybe something I did then would be different to today. There's still something people can take away. And like I said to you, I think more than anything, it's bringing people into my world. Like, I
Yeah.
still think with YouTube, when you've done the work up front where there's enough content for someone to have like a binge marathon. Like, I
Mhm.
love it when I get someone in my DMs being like, oh my God, I've just discovered you. And they'll send me an image of the playlist and I can see
It's
them
all
it's
you, all
working.
your face.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm good. Like, again, if I took a year off, like, there's enough of
Yeah.
me online. There's enough for them to be in my world, know what I'm about, feel like if they met me in real life, I don't think I'm wildly different from what I am online.
Yeah.
And again, for them to know what's important to me and why I want them to be a part of this world.
Yes, I think that is honestly my favorite thing about YouTube is the longevity of the
Yeah.
content you create, the legacy that you're really building with that content bank. It's just so unlike any other
Yeah.
content channel. And so I appreciate you sharing that through your perspective. To wrap up our time together today in this case study, I promised our listeners I would circle back to this brief point you had mentioned at the very
Mhm.
beginning around brand partnerships. So,
Mm.
just to give a little bit of context, like we've talked about today, $330,000 is how much you were able to make from your own offers. You also earned an additional almost $2,000 from AdSense. So that's for those of you who are not familiar with
Mm.
YouTube. If you become monetized on YouTube, you can earn ad revenue from
Yeah.
ads that play in the middle of your video, and then you also play in the world of brand partnerships, making between $3,500 up to $10,000 per brand deal. I
Mhm.
don't know if you know off the top of your head how much
Mhm.
total you made from brand partnership revenue this year. If you want to share, feel free.
Mm.
But tangential to that, I also kind of want to touch on this idea of like multiple touch money. And again, you really
Mm.
briefly threw it in at the beginning, but I don't know if all of our listeners caught it.
Yeah.
You were saying how sometimes you get paid to do one thing, like a service, like a makeup look for someone for an event. But on top of that, if you're able to bring in a brand who's sponsoring that, you're making an additional couple $1,000s. So, can you talk a little bit more about that
Mm. Yes.
multiplication strategy? And then also, if you want to share any other data surrounding your brand partnerships from this year.
Yeah, so I would say this year I actually took more time off brand partnerships to focus on because we brought a new mastermind out, which is Industry Icon, where we actually teach people how to get 5, 6 figure sponsorships and sell education and become an industry icon. So that was like our focus this year. But I know the year before, and even I would say the last 5 years of being a makeup artist, that was definitely a huge part of me having consistent 5 figure months
Mhm.
because like I said, you could have a scenario where the job you're being paid to do, whether it's a celebrity or high profile person, is, let's say it's $1,000, but then a brand comes along and is like, okay, if you can say you've used this and we can get you to use our product, and you post about you showed the product in action with that person, we will pay X amount for it. And again, I think that's also because they know I've built an audience that trusts me, that they've built an audience that value my opinion. And there's a lot of things I turn down. I will be very clear about that. There's a lot of things I turn down. But yeah, I feel like that was early on in my career as well. Like, that was a huge part of me realizing how many different ways there are to make money as a creative entrepreneur, as a content creator, as an artist, as a creative. I think my first YouTube video I ever got sponsored was like $3,500, and it was a brand that I love. Like, I felt like I'd won the lottery. I was like, so I'm going to talk about a brand that I love anyway and always talk about, and they're going to pay me $3,500.
Yeah.
And again, I think from what I've seen as well, I think because I'm very vocal on like, you are getting an expert, you're not just getting a content creator.
Mhm.
Brands also trust me when it comes to the deliverables. There's not like pages and pages of like keynotes and key points. Like, of course, yes, there are key language or key points that I have to discuss, but it's also like, we want you to put your spin on it. And that's the collaborations I love the most, because I think of them more as collaborations than a sponsorship, in
Yeah.
that a brand wants my input. They want me to show my audience the things that maybe the brand doesn't even know about their product. Like, I'm like, and did you know you could do this? So that makes it really fun for me. And I think, sponsorship and education are becoming interchangeable now, because you can also sponsor something with your own products. Like when I do my
Mhm.
podcast, I'm able to sponsor via my own courses, my own programs. But I think, again, if you've done that front load work of
Mhm.
having content for your audience, so even if you haven't posted for a year and someone finds you right now, is there somewhere for them to go from that? I guess
Mhm.
we call it a CTA, a call to action. Is there something for them to do from that video? I think that's important to think about as well. Like, where are you sending them next? Even if you're not there, where should they be going?
Absolutely. I think it's like a flywheel, right? Like whatever you're doing over here, it can impact or
Yeah,
have some sort of benefit to something else that you're doing. So if you kind of zoom out and look more
yeah,
holistically at everything you've got going on in your ecosystem, you're going to make something that you do have a much bigger or much longer, I should say, lifespan and a greater impact. So
yeah.
that is an excellent end, I think, to this case study. This has been really helpful. Thank you so much, Harry, for coming on our show and sharing your experience as a YouTuber. Obviously, people can find you on YouTube. We'll make sure that we'll make sure that your links are below in the show notes. But where else can our
Yeah.
audience connect with you if they want to learn more about the work you do?
Thank you so much, Alan. I've loved being here and chatting with you. HarrietHadfield.com is like our home hub. Come there for everything. Again, Harry Makes It Up. You'll find me there on Instagram and YouTube. And we also have at Freelance for Freedom on Instagram, which is our community of creative entrepreneurs. So yeah, come join. Come hang out.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time
Yeah.
today.
Thank you.